Peter, you're on my screen now.
Yes, we hear you.
As a reminder, this meeting is being recorded. Members of the public are asked to remain muted with their video off. Trustees and staff are asked to remain muted unless you're speaking. Thank you.
All right. Phil, could you please call the roll?
First of all, can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Not well.
I'm not having a good connection, so I will call the roll and I will attempt to call in on my phone. Trustee Hallwax. Trustee Listener.
Here.
Trustee Miller. Trustee Mulvaney. Trustee Rubin.
Here.
Trustee Brick. President Levin.
I am here, and we have a quorum. Today's Village Board meeting, just to remind everybody, is being conducted as a virtual meeting via WebEx software and is being audio recorded and simultaneous casted on the Village's Facebook page as the Village continues to support social distancing to try to prevent the spread of coronavirus. A quorum of the members of the board are present via remote access. Before we begin formal business of the agenda, I'd like to ask the village's attorney, Steve Elrod, to explain the legal basis for holding a virtual meeting. Steve?
Thank you, President Levin. As I've reported at our prior virtual meetings, the otherwise applicable provisions of the Illinois Open Meetings Act have been suspended by Governor Pritzker in the emergency proclamations that he has issued. You may recall that Governor Pritzker issued an emergency proclamation in March. That proclamation is currently being challenged in the Illinois courts. He issued a proclamation on April 30th, restating the basis for his emergency. I am comfortable that the litigation that is currently pending concerning the original proclamation, for which a temporary restraining order was issued by a court in Clay County, does not impact the village of Glencoe from proceeding with its meeting tonight. I'm also comfortable that the provision of the Illinois Open Meetings Act has been sufficiently waived by the governor to allow this board to continue with the meeting in this format and in this fashion this evening. I'm happy to answer any questions about the governor's order or the litigation that's pending.
If there are no questions, in order to help facilitate this meeting, as I did with our last meeting, let me explain how it is that we are going to proceed. I ask each member of the board and staff to mute your lines if you're not speaking and unmute your lines when you speak. Okay, to help minimize background noise. Members of the public are muted and should remain muted during the meeting. Members of the public should not share their video. To turn off your video, click on the video camera button at the bottom of your screen so that the button turns red. After each agenda item is presented, I will ask each trustee if they have any questions or comments. I will call the trustees in alphabetical order. I will ask for a roll call rather than voice votes on any agenda item requiring a vote. Normally at this time, we would be taking up minutes, but there are no minutes that are at this time ready for presentation covering either our prior April 16th meeting, and those minutes and the minutes of this meeting will be taken up at our May 21st meeting. So the first order of business that we get to now really has to do with public comment. In accordance with the supplemental rule the board approved on April 16th, 2020, here is how public comment will be taken at this meeting. The email address and telephone number designated for public comment for this meeting were published with the meeting agenda. In a moment, I will ask a management analyst and deputy clerk, Jordan Lesser, to read the public comments that were submitted prior to the meeting in compliance with the instructions that were previously published with the meeting materials. If a member of the public would like to submit a public comment during this meeting, please email your comment to Glencoe meeting, that's singular, Glencoe meeting at villageofglencoe.org. Comments submitted during the meeting may be read at the end of the meeting. Written comments should be limited to 200 words or less. At this time, I'm going to ask Management Analyst Lester to read the public comments, if any, that were submitted prior to the meeting.
Good evening. Thank you, President Levin. This is Management Analyst Deputy Clerk Jordan Lester. For tonight's meeting, we received 2 comments from the public. The first comment from the public is from resident Benjamin Miller at 182 Maple Hill Road. And his comment is as follows. Dear Village Trustees, I am writing about 2 topics. 1, providing input on the board's comment policy. 2, providing input on agenda topic, Roman numeral 6, subletter B, proposed changes to 2020 budget to mitigate the financial impact of COVID-19. Topic 1, I would ask that the board consider modifying its comment policy that only allows for email comments of 200 words to virtual meetings. 200 words represents approximately 90 seconds of talking, and it is very difficult to make a comment of any substance within that constraint. Given that COVID-19 may be with us for a while, this would seem to be a small change to enable better communications and input to the board. Topic 2. I have submitted a separate comment that was longer than 200 words with 3 specific pieces of input regarding the potential changes to the 2020 budget. Since it was longer than the 200 words, I asked that it just be delivered to the trustees and noted in the record, since current comment rules unfortunately do not appear to allow it to be read into the record. The 10-word summary is that in difficult times, I believe we should work together and share the burden of change. So that is the first comment for this evening. Moving to the second comment for this evening, it is from Roberta Olshansky at 111 Lakewood Drive, and her comment is as follows. Thank you for the wonderful job you are doing to keep our village safe. I am wondering whether or not there will be a village curbside pickup this year. If so, when do you think it will not happen? Thank you. And then Ms. Olshansky says, be safe, be calm, be well, and be hopeful. Trustees and President Levin, just as a note, village staff was able to respond to Ms. Olshansky's comments. We do have our fall cleanup day is scheduled for Saturday, October 17th. We responded to Ms. Olshansky. And President Levin, we did not receive any other public comments in accordance with the public comment procedure.
Thank you. Normally at this time we do the report of committees. Since we have not had any committee meetings since our last meeting, I would skip those as such, but instead of just having a financial report, which is what we would normally do now, since we did not have a full month and have our regular financial report, our Director of Finance, Nikki Larson, had submitted some material to us telling us what was going on and giving us a little background. And I would ask Director Larson to briefly comment on the financial materials she provided as part of the meeting materials that were posted for this meeting. Nikki?
Okay. Thank you, President Levin. To share hopefully you can see point. Can you see that? Apologies.
I can see that.
Let me see.
President Levin,
Apologize.
this is Trustee Mulvaney. I'm curious about those public comments and if we'll be addressing them later in the meeting, or if we missed our chance here to comment on the suggestions from public comment 1.
Well, while Nikki's getting her slideshow ready, I certainly would be happy to hear any public comments. Let me start. And since you had brought it up, and I thank you for reminding me that we didn't have that opportunity, let me start with you, Peter, and then I'll go back to the top and start with the rest of the trustees. Any comments on it that you would like to make?
Yes, so getting some feedback. The first suggestion of increasing the public comment period, the public submittals of more than 200 words seems like a reasonable ask. As the gentleman said, 90-second comment is pretty brief for any substantial suggestion, and it could lead to a variety of odd ways of trying to get more time. So I think we ought to consider that, and especially for these online meetings, create an opportunity to make it easier for people to say their thoughts and comments. So I'm in favor of that. The second point he made was that essentially he sent us some suggestions around the budget, which I think we're about to talk about. And I agree with many of his points, or at least think that they should be aired between us. And so that's my second thought, is maybe during the Finance Committee review of the budget, we can try to address some of his thoughts around or suggestions on the budget.
Okay, Trustee Listener, do you have any thoughts?
Well, I would agree on increasing the 200-word limit for the simple reason that if someone was in person, they would have a 3-minute limit if we were having a normal meeting. So I think increasing it to whatever that word count that equals the 3-minute might be a fairer limitation for public comment.
I would think so, in that 1 minute is considered about 90 seconds worth. And so I would think 400 words would be the equivalent of 3 minutes worth.
President Levin, it's Village Attorney Elrod. The 200 word number was arbitrary, and it was intended to, as closely as possible, approximate 3 minutes. If your collective wisdom thinks that that there aren't enough words to allow you to get to 3 minutes, then I would encourage you to up the word count. But that's just so you know the genesis of where that came from in the first place. And other villages in the area have used the same thing, the same word count, but the goal was to approximate 3 minutes.
Correct. Barbara Miller, do you have any thoughts? Trustee Miller?
I agree about the 3 minutes, and if we've hit it wrong with the 200 words, and I have no reason to doubt our resident Mr. Miller, then yes, absolutely. I think it's good to get whatever input people want to give us, and I look forward to discussing whatever comments are appropriate during the appropriate time in finance, and also ongoing. I thought it was an interesting email, thoughtful, and I want to thank him. I don't know if he's on, but I want to thank him if he is, for his suggestions.
Trustee Rubin? Trustee Vree?
Sorry, it's Gary. Sorry, I was just having
Gary.
unmute. First, I'm fine increasing the word limit as others may deem appropriate. I too would prefer more communication from folks and not to be so I'm fine with that. As to the content of his separate email, I too would be happy to discuss that and think that we should.
All right. Trustee Vree?
Yeah, I'm also 3 minutes is the goal. So whatever word count is 3 minutes, I'm in favor of. And then as far as the email goes, yeah, I think that's what this meeting is going to be about, is just talking about the budget and how we see it progressing. So all of it is good.
Okay, I don't believe Trustee Hallwass has been able to join us yet. So if you are with us, give me a shout. All righty, I will assume that he is not. I would think just give it a try, and we can see if it's too long or if it's right. I have no problem with suggesting that we increase the word limit to 400 words, just to see if he's right about the 90 seconds and then making it 3 minutes. If you all think that is a reasonable thing for us to test going forward, I would certainly entertain a motion to amend our prior adopted provision on a comment to change the word limit from 200 to 400.
So moved.
Second.
May I have a roll call, please?
Trustee Listener?
Yes.
Trustee Miller?
Yes.
Trustee Mulvaney?
Yes.
Trustee Rubin? Trustee Vree?
Yes.
All righty. Passed. We now turn to Nikki Larson, to our finance director. And Nikki, could you go through the presentation and tell us a little bit about what's going on with our current finances?
Yes, thank you, President Levin. Can you hear me? Okay, good. Just one point of clarification before I begin. The initial conversation that we're having this evening and the presentation that's before you is primarily focused on the interim financial information that we're providing to the board. This was based off of the conversation that we had at the April 16th board meeting about providing additional financial information more frequently so that we can monitor the financial health of the village. So later in the board meeting is when we will have a more detailed discussion about modifications to the Stubbier budget. So included in your packet this evening was an interim financial snapshot. This is just designed to give a little bit more information about current collections and where we stand today. Before we review the numbers, I do want to just make note that these are interim numbers. We are still working through the month-end close process for the month of April. So these numbers will continue to change slightly. But this is just to give kind of a high-level overview. There we go. So just working through the format of this, we have identified both major revenues of the village and those that are economically sensitive, that would be particularly vulnerable to changes in the local economy. And just working from left to right, we've included actual numbers for the month of March, actual for the month of April, a year-to-date total, and then that final column shows the variance, the total variance between what we've actually received in cash versus what was budgeted for the month, and that last column was the year, and what was collected in the prior year. So I won't go through every one of these, but just highlighting some of the important areas to focus on. Obviously, our largest revenue is property taxes, particularly so in the general fund. And we are showing a slight variance between what was collected and what was budgeted for the current year, as well as what was collected in the prior year. We do expect this to catch up by the end of the year, as we talked about in April. We do think this is just timing at that point. Collections of property taxes can vary from year to year, so it is still a little bit early to get concerned about this. Moving down the line to sales taxes, these numbers are very positive. Contrary to what we had discussed at the April board meeting, we had been told by the comptroller's office that we would not receive revenues in April from them. So we were very pleasantly surprised that we did receive all of our state disbursements in the month of April. And just a specific note about sales taxes in particular, this is the village's share of sales taxes that are collected by the state. And because of the way they're remitted and collected and then subsequently dispersed, these numbers show approximately a 3-month lag. So the figures that are shown here would be prior to the governor's shutdown. And then moving down the line, use taxes and income taxes are very similar with a several month delay, and those both come from the state as well. As we continue to the next screen, we are starting to see the impact of the delay in the vehicle license deadline. As the board will recall, we did receive direction to extend that deadline from the normal deadline to June 30th. The beginning of the season was a strong start. We collected almost twice what we had in the prior year, and then we are starting to see those collections trail off in April. So you can see it goes from 109,000 down to 65,000. However, we do expect to see that pick back up as we get closer to that June 30th deadline. We have also seen some declines in our electric utility tax and our natural gas utility tax. Some of that is related to some of the milder weather that we've had, but we will continue to monitor those as well. We've also received some additional information from the Illinois Municipal League that we do believe our personal property replacement tax may decline in the coming months. So we will continue to monitor that, but those numbers remain strong as of this point in time. And then the last thing I want to point out on this screen is that volumetric water revenue and sewer charges look very, very low for the month of April. And that's primarily because we have not closed the month yet. And those year-end billing numbers are not, or those month-end billing numbers are not included in those numbers yet. And then the last piece that we identified as part of the snapshot are some additional funding opportunities or funding that the village has received that were not anticipated as part of the original Stubbier budget. Most of, 2 out of the 3 of these are related to financial assistance that's received as part of the pandemic. The village did receive a small health and human services grant that was designed to reimburse us for some of the expenses that we have incurred in transporting COVID-19 patients. And then we were also notified by IDOT that they will be distributing a Rebuild Illinois grant. We're supposed to be receiving that money this week. That's why it's not shown in March or April, but it is in the year-to-date total. And they've also indicated that they will be dispersing that money twice this year. So we do expect to see as much as 180,000 or just shy of 200,000 from that. And the last item here was cannabis tax. As the board recalls, we did firmly decide that that would not be collected locally. This represents just the amount of taxes that is shared with us from the state of Illinois from statewide collections. And those are dispersed to all of the villages and cities within Illinois, regardless of whether or not sales take place within your town. And at this point, I'm happy to answer any questions or address any comments on the interim financials.
Nikki, can I add just one thing? This is Phil Connolly, the village manager. One additional point relative to property taxes. We received information in the last week and a half or so from Cook County that they intend to issue property tax bills on their normal schedule. So the second installment of property taxes is expected to be mailed out to homeowners in June. And those receipts are still anticipated to be delivered to us and other taxing bodies on the normal schedule, so beginning in August. You may recall last month when we were talking about that, there was some anticipation that those would be delayed until the end of the calendar year. So that's the information we've received thus far from Cook County, and we will continue to monitor that.
In terms of trustee comments, trustee Listener, any comment or questions?
No questions or comments.
Trustee Miller?
No, none for me either.
Trustee Mulvaney? Trustee Rubin?
No, except thank you. That was very informative.
Trustee Dree?
Yeah, this is helpful. I guess the only question I have, can you just, these buckets, just tell us which ones are more accurately reflective of what's going on now versus what's on these lags? So the 3 months you mentioned for sales tax, are permits up to date? Which ones are better reflective of today versus some period in the past?
Yes, actually, that's a great question. So property taxes are up to date in terms of what we've collected and cash-wise, understanding that we'll have a second installment. Those items that are on a delay are sales taxes, use taxes, and income taxes. Let me see if I have.
PPRT is also delayed.
PPRT, thank you, President Levin, and motor fuel tax as well. So those are primarily items that flow through the state, then have a remittance process that go through the Department of Revenue and then are subsequently remitted back to us. And I should note, since you asked that question, and we are talking about motor fuel tax, we are expecting with the decreased amount of driving that's happening right now, because so many people are working at home, we will see a decline in motor fuel tax in the future as well. It's just not reflected here yet.
Okay, thank you.
And I assume, has Trustee Hallwax joined us yet? Not yet. Okay. Our next order of business is the village manager's report which I believe will begin with an overview of the planning process for reopening the village hall. And I wanted to say thank you to Nikki Larson for doing such a great job on all that.
I'll add my thanks to Nikki. She is working hard to keep those numbers up to date and accurate, and we'll continue to be able to report on those every one of our meetings coming up. Good evening, everyone. This is Phil Corrali, the village manager. I do have, as President Levin noted, a brief update this evening relative to some of our planning process that's underway. But before I get into that, first and foremost, I wanted to mention that our two public works employees that were diagnosed with COVID-19 over the past month have both fully recovered and are back to work. I know that a lot of positive thoughts were sent their way by the entire Glencoe community. And I know that both are very grateful for the outpouring of support that was received. And we are just so pleased to welcome them back to work. And we look forward to them continuing to be part of our work group. As President Levin had alluded to, we are beginning the process of planning for what things may look like at some point in the future when our public buildings reopen. As it stands right now, I remain pleased to report that all of our village departments remain fully operational within the current structure, which is balancing on-premise and work-from-home work environments for all of our employees. This current structure has been in place since March 16th. The current stay-at-home order will remain in effect through May 30th, and at this time, we do not know whether that will again be extended into early summer. Yesterday, Governor Pritzker announced the Restore Illinois plan. This is a plan that's a 5-phased plan that's intended to safely reopen the state's economy, guided by public health metrics designed to provide a framework for reopening businesses, educational institutions, recreational activities in each phase. What we've been told and what the governor indicated was that this initial plan can and will be updated as research and science develop and as effective treatments or vaccines are realized. Currently, we are in phase 2, which is known as flattening, according to this schedule. With these timelines in mind, and given our commitment toward providing excellent customer service to our residents and business community as effectively as possible, and to do so as safely as possible for our staff and customers, our executive leadership team and I have started the planning process for the eventual reopening of Village Hall and our other buildings to the public. There is still much to be considered in these planning efforts, but I did want to provide the board and the community this evening with a brief overview of how we're working through it. As you can imagine, it's going to be much more difficult and require more planning to reopen the Village Hall than it did to shut it down. It's safe to say that when we reopen, we're expecting there to be a number of changes to operations and to the physical environment in order to maintain the safety of our employees and those who are doing business in Village Hall. Reopening is expected at this point to likely be a phased process. Some of what we're considering include how to best provide services to ensure we are meeting the needs of our residents and our businesses. We're going to be conducting a review of which services may be potentially offered in person at Village Hall initially, and which services may continue to be provided remotely as part of a phased reopening. We're also considering how to thoughtfully provide protection to visitors at Village Hall. The duration of the current stay-at-home order is also in our thinking, and whether or not there will be other state actions, such as the Restore Illinois plan, that may evolve over the coming weeks that may impact reopening. In addition, the concern that there be enough availability of personal protective equipment for our staff, as well as the necessary inventory of cleaning and disinfecting supplies to keep both public spaces and employee work areas clean. We're looking at the ability to practice social distancing in our workspaces and public spaces at Village Hall, In the short term, this could mean reduced hours that were open to the public, or and/or the continuation of some remote work and/or implementing staggered schedules. All of those are on the table right now. And also, one thing that we also have to keep in mind is the impact to our workforce on the continuation of school closures, cancellations of summer camps, and the availability of childcare as our employees return to work and in some cases may maintain certain remote work opportunities to them. So as I mentioned—
We can't hear you, or at least I can't.
I'm sorry, what was that?
Gary Rubin said that he was having trouble hearing you, although you're coming in very clearly on my set.
Interesting. Okay, maybe it's on my side. Thanks.
I'm sorry about that. I'll speak up a little bit and see if that helps. With the governor's new plan, we do have a resource which we're going to be able to reference as a guide to this process that we're going to need to employ to ensure the safety and well-being of all of those individuals who are in our public buildings. We also plan to utilize recommendations from public health experts regarding social distancing and workplace safety. Likewise, an important part of this is also reviewing how public in-person meetings, like the one we're having tonight, may reconvene in the future, and what appropriate steps the village may need to take for these important community meetings to take place physically in the village hall, whether there's some technology that we're going to need to employ differently, and how we may also engage social distancing standards. So again, we're very early on in the planning process. I wanted to just provide this overview to the board and to the community to let everyone know that we are thinking about it. We are planning with this to find a way to get our public buildings back open in a safe way, and we remain committed to the health and well-being of both our employees and our customers. And so we'll keep the village board apprised as we work through these important plans. With that concludes my manager's report, or formal manager's report. I'm happy to answer any questions that the board may have this evening.
Gail, do you have any questions?
No, I don't. Thank you.
Trustee Miller?
No questions for me at all. It all sounded reasonable, and I do want to emphasize safety, both for the staff and for the residents. I guess I did have a question. I'm sorry. Is there a sense among staff, or that you've gotten from the public, that the closure of the village hall, et cetera, is impacting the delivery of services?
Sorry, Barbara, you broke up.
There's some feedback. I don't know if it's on my end. I'll just speak a little louder. Is this better, Phil?
I can hear you. Yeah, I think it was in the background. It wasn't you.
Okay. So my is there a sense among staff, or in terms of feedback that you've gotten from residents, that we are not able to meet residents' needs with the current setup?
I have not received that specific feedback. Certainly, we're a service-based organization. That's what we do, and in a perfect environment, we're in the village hall, and we're doing what we have always done. I think in this environment, what we've been able to do pretty effectively is to supplement that in-person presence with the necessary virtual options available to folks. We are still taking phone calls. If people are calling individual employees extensions, those extensions are being picked up by those individual employees. Emails are being responded to, bills are being processed, vehicle stickers are being processed. Public safety, public works are both in. I think for the most part, we have done a great job of trying to keep those services intact. Not everything is simple, and I think what we are also dialoguing about are what changes to our overall service delivery are we going to be making when we're back in the village hall, because we've been able to adapt certain processes, the submittal of plan review or through the plan review process of electronic plans versus hard copy plans, things like that. So I have not received complaints. In fact, I've heard a number of compliments from the community that they're getting their questions asked, and people are being very responsive as they are typically used to. That being said, we do anticipate at some point that the necessary work from home structure that we have in place is likely to end.
Barbara, I would add to what Phil said that I've received a number of communications and things throughout this whole period from residents. And till now, every single one of them has been very highly complimentary of the village's services and how we've been able to respond very quickly to inquiries and thoughts through all this. Probably the only thing that I've had residents telling me they had a concern about was when we had to cancel the spring pickup, and the village or I responded and explained why it wasn't feasible to do that at this point in time. And everybody has received that with an understanding that we've communicated with, or at least that I have, and thanked me for the prompt response. So far, I think we've been doing a truly outstanding job, and those are the kinds of languages that we are doing a truly outstanding job that I've been hearing from residents.
Thank you.
Peter, do you have any questions?
I do. Phil, thanks for the report. I think it's important that we have planning horizons here in the current phase, the transition period, and then a longer term plan. And I know you're thinking that through, so thanks. I do have a question about the current planning and process. And first off, can you confirm that we do not have anybody working at Village Hall now, but we do at like the Public Works facility have people there during normal working hours?
The way it's structured right now is the finance department is working remotely, almost, well, I should say the vast majority of the finance department is working remotely 100% of the time. Finance director has been coming in a few days per week to deal with certain things that are necessary in person. Our community development function, so building, zoning, and planning, engineering, is also working remotely most of the time. They are inspections and working things on a regular basis, as is the Public Works director. Our superintendent of Public Works across the street and our Public Works supervisors are on a staffing rotation, along with our Public Works maintenance operators, who are also on the rotation. So there are people in the Public Works building all week long. With respect to public safety, our civilians, our records clerks, our community service officers, those individuals are also on a rotation. So there is one of them present every day, and then they are rotating that presence. The public director and the deputy chiefs are also on a rotation. So they are, one of them is always present, and then our public safety shifts are operating generally as normal, with our 12-hour shifts for police shifts and 24-hour shifts for fire. So there is always a physical presence within the Village Hall structure, as public safety is a 24-hour-a-day operation. We have not been open to the public, so people aren't walking in generally. And so we have been working to try to limit even staff interaction among themselves when they're physically present. But that's an overview kind of the public works and village hall operations. And then obviously the water plant is operating with its team on rotation.
Thanks, Bill. I have a question. Are we providing those who are working from home more often now with any kind of guidance, tips, and tricks as to how to be productive while working from home, how to manage people while they're working remotely? Ergonomics is something I also worry about or think about. Do people have the right resources in their home offices, the right ergonomics so they're not being injured, to manage and be fully productive in this current work environment?
It's a great question. One of the that I'm very pleased with our staff is that we've been able to maintain productivity, in particular, just looking at the finance department as an example. Every one of those individuals has a tablet or a laptop computer provided by the village. We've also provided additional monitors for them to be able to better conduct their work. Some of them have cell phones that are issued from the village where their desk phones are being automatically redirected to those cell phones. To those that don't have a village supplied cell phone, we are going to be reimbursing for some of their own personal use of that phone to answer questions of residents. We started about 4 years ago a process of providing more mobile devices to our staff so that when actually back in March we began contemplating this work from home environment, there were only 2 employees who needed to have a laptop issued to them. Everyone else had a mobile device available already. And that has really eased our ability to provide this work from home structure. It is something that on a long-term basis we are looking at. It is something that we were looking at before the COVID-19 pandemic in terms of providing opportunities for some telecommuting for certain positions. So that is a component of this that will live on after the COVID-19 pandemic is behind us. So it is something that we're continuing to dialogue over. We are also looking at if this is likely to be an extended work from home and work from the office situation over the coming, let's say, 18 months. But there may need to be some modest investments in some additional monitors, keyboards, mice, and some mobile devices. But those are actually very small numbers based upon the work that we've been doing over the last 4 years.
Thank you, Phil.
Gary, any thoughts?
Questions to add? Thank you.
Jonathan?
No questions by me.
Joe? All righty. Moving on. Anything else on your report, Phil?
That is it for me. Thank you, President Levin.
Okay. The first thing on my report is the consideration of the extension of village president's declaration of emergency until the close of business of our next meeting. And to go over that again and put it in context, I would ask Steve Elrod to just explain a little bit to us about why we have to do this and what we're doing.
Very quickly, President Levin, because I've explained this at your prior meetings, the Illinois statutes concerning the emergency declaration authority for village presidents in both home rule and non-home rule communities extends only for a 7-day period, but that period can be extended by action of the Board of Trustees. The village president President Levin initially entered an emergency declaration on March 17th at your last in-person meeting. And at meetings subsequent to that, the board has extended the declaration. If no action is taken, his emergency declaration will expire at the adjournment of this meeting today because it was set to the next regular or special meeting. The village president, the village manager, and I are recommending that you consider extending the emergency declaration for another time period, perhaps to the next regular meeting, the adjournment of the next regular or special meeting of the village board.
And I guess I would put it in these terms as a normal matter, because that declaration gives us a variety of powers that are very important in order to run the village when the offices and things are closed. My recommendation, of course, is that we extend it to the adjournment of the next regular, special, or emergency meeting of the Board of Trustees, which is what we've been extending it to each time. That said, I would start with Gail Listener. Do you have any comments or thoughts on it?
President Levin, this is Manager Corrali. I apologize. I don't mean to cut you off, Trustee Listener. I believe Trustee Hallwax has joined us via phone. Trustee Hallwax?
I'm here.
Okay.
So
I just want to note for the record at 5:52 p.m. that you are present at our meeting this evening.
And with your understanding, I'll omit a 4-hour discussion of what we've done till now and start out with asking you if you have any comments on our extending the emergency order till the next regular or end of the next regular, special, or emergency meeting of the board.
This is Joe. If that's for me, I would be in favor.
Okay. Gail, do you have anything that you would like to add?
No, I also agree that it's a reasonable for us to be.
Barbara Miller?
No, I'm in favor.
Thank you. Peter Mulvaney?
No questions.
Rubin?
I'm in favor.
Jonathan Bree?
I'm in favor too.
Okay. Just as a formality, because I said I would do the votes by a roll call vote. Manager Corrali, would you please call the roll on? Oh, I got first asked for motion and second. May I
Should have a motion? So moved.
Motion and a second.
Second.
Now it is
By Trustee Rubin, second by Trustee Bree.
May I have a roll call?
Yes.
Listener. Trustee Miller.
Yes.
Trustee Rubin.
Yes.
Trustee Bree.
Yes.
Have we completed the roll call?
Yes.
Okay. And I assume that passed. The next order of business in our packet, I had submitted a list of people that we were talking about that I have appointed, subject to your approval, to official village positions and village commissions. And so I'm going to ask each of you if you have any comments or thoughts on that. And then when we finish that, then I'll ask for a motion. Trustee Hallwax, any comments or thoughts before on that?
No comments.
Trustee Listener?
No comments or questions.
Trustee Miller?
No comments or questions.
Trustee Mulvaney?
No questions.
Okay. Trustee Bree?
No questions.
Gary, are you having trouble?
Yes. When certain people's mics are on, I'm getting just some static, I guess, or some feedback. No comments.
Okay. Given that, may I have a motion to approve the appointments?
Trustee Miller.
Second, Mulvaney.
Manager Corrali, may I have a roll call, please?
Trustee Hallwax.
Yes.
Trustee Listener.
Yes.
Trustee Miller. Trustee Mulvaney.
Yes.
Trustee Rubin.
Yes.
Trustee Reed.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. I wanted to give, as part of my report, a little discussion of what we're doing and how it fits in with the whole question of COVID-19. The village has been very active, and I've been extremely active. I'm working with 3 organizations that are quite active on a daily basis in looking at various problems and issues and working with all of the mayors and managers throughout the state and in our area. The Illinois Municipal League, of course, is working to make sure that there is good communication between the governor's office and all of us, and to put together information every day on what's occurring and to get questions and to facilitate that. So I each day have communications, both emails and phone communications with my fellows in the Illinois Municipal League, and that the Metropolitan Mayors Association is, of course, coordinating all the mayors in our region and in discussions and facilitating work between the city of Chicago and Mayor Lightfoot and all of us on what we're doing, how to do it, what are the issues, what information we should work with the state on, and that goes on a daily basis. The Northwest Municipal Conference has been very active, and has my legislative committee of that conference, with us communicating with state and federal legislatures and with putting together numerous surveys for all of the managers in the conference and putting together best practices. All of us on a daily basis work together to make sure that everything and concepts that we come up with, or ideas or questions, are discussed, and that the coordination of how we all react to it is worked through the Northwest Municipal Conference. In addition to working with the members of all 3 of those on a regular daily basis, we have conference calls twice a week on Tuesdays and Fridays with the governor and his staff, and discuss all the statistics and what's going on and what needs to be done and where we're going from here. We also have conference calls that the Northwest Municipal Conference hosts with President Tony Preckwinkle of the county, in working on the interrelationships and with the county medical people on coordinating what is going on in Cook County with respect to all this. And we also have on Sundays a conference call with Mayor Lightfoot and all of her staff to discuss the interrelationship of the city of Chicago and all of us, and what we should be doing with our legislators, et cetera. And I have regular communication going. Just before this meeting, I just was talking to Brad Snyder about a number of things that relate to what the federal government is doing and what's going on, and when Congress is going to be back in session and that. And so it has been a very busy period, and the village is participating with its fellow municipalities, both in the state and nationally, on trying to figure out the best ways to handle all this. With that in mind, I also wanted to make a little quick statement and discussion again, just to remind everybody about what we hope our residents are hearing and thinking with respect to what we need to do to recover from this. And in that, I prepared a little discussion, which starts with last week. Really felt like spring in Glencoe. 2 days filled with warm sunshine, birds singing, flowers blooming, made for the perfect opportunity to be outside. It made us grateful that we have wonderful amenities to enjoy in the spring, like the Glencoe Golf Club, our parks, the lakefront, and the Green Bay Trail. The beautiful weather and the enjoyment of being outside also made it easy to forget, if just for one sunny moment, that we are in the midst of a pandemic and that COVID-19 virus is still spreading in Illinois. It's important for all members of our community to remember, in spite of spring weather, that the pandemic with its risks is not yet behind us. We still have work to do and a part to play in helping to contain it. Beginning May 1st, Governor Pritzker's executive order requires all Illinoisans, including us here in Glencoe, to wear face coverings in public when social distancing isn't possible. This requirement applies to all residents over 2 who are medically able to wear face coverings. As president, I thank our residents and business employees that are doing their part and using face coverings in public when social distancing isn't possible. I know from my own experience, it is easy in the beautiful sunshine to forget. So I think it is worth reminding everyone, especially our residents who are listening, that by social distancing and wearing face coverings, we are not only protecting ourselves, but our neighbors and all the critical workers, including our village workforce, who have put themselves at risk to take care of us. The more careful we are about social distancing and wearing face masks, the sooner COVID-19 will be history and we can go back to enjoying springtime in Glencoe. For now, when walking, running, or cycling, keep at least 6 feet of separation between yourself and non-family members, and use a face covering if it's not possible. Runners and cyclists, I especially ask for your help with this, particularly when passing others. Passing should always be done at a safe distance to prevent physical injury, and now, please remember that you need to incorporate social distancing or face coverings. While it may not be concerning to you to quickly pass another trail user, it may be to them. Just a reminder, you can still walk and run in the parks or along the beach. On the plus side, you can play a round of golf at the Glencoe Golf Club. Golfers can play in twosomes or alone and must register in advance for their tee times. Be ready to carry your bag. The governor's order provides that power carts and rental pull carts cannot be used. Under the governor's order, golfers should wear a face covering if they cannot maintain at least 6 feet of separation with their partner or others on the course. Under the governor's orders, the golf club restaurant can only provide takeout, and the restaurant itself and the clubhouse, restrooms, and pro shop must remain closed even to golfers. You can enjoy downtown Glencoe and pick up takeout from our restaurants or curbside pickup from our retailers. However, please be mindful to maintain at least 6 feet of separation between yourself and others and wear a face covering if you cannot maintain that separation. We need to fight the temptation to gather and linger in these areas as we ordinarily would. You'll see more signs in the coming days downtown to help remember social distancing. What each of us does in the community matters and impacts others. Every step we take to limit further spread of COVID-19 brings us one step closer to our region being ready for the next phase of Governor Pritzker's Restore Illinois plan and gives us the opportunity to see more businesses open. Continue to enjoy our warm, sunny spring days, but remember to maintain space, cover your face, and we're in this together. While many of our residents are doing their part and using face coverings in public, unfortunately, there are some that are not. To the residents and business employees who are complying with face covering orders, I thank you. To the individuals who are not using face coverings in public but are able to safely do so, I remind you to need to comply with the governor's orders and wear face coverings in public when you can't practice social distancing. This applies to everyone. And so I thank you for this, and I hope you will all join me in reminding all of our residents to please help. We need them, and our employees will healthily and happily respect the fact that we care enough about them to do that. That's my little message. With that said, our next board meeting is currently scheduled for Thursday, May 21st. That brings us to the consent agenda. Since we're having a virtual meeting, I would ask that the village manager read off the titles of the various pieces that are on the consent agenda.
Thank you, President Levin. The first item, item A, is ratification of the April 2020 early checklist. The second item, item B, is consideration of an ordinance further amending Chapter 35A of the Village of Glencoe Code to delay the effective date of the places for eating tax. Those are the two items on the consent agenda this evening.
Okay, I'm going to go through the list and ask if anybody has any questions or comments with respect to any of those. Joe Hallwax?
No comments.
Gail Listener?
No.
Trustee Barbara Miller?
None for me.
Trustee Peter Mulvaney?
No questions.
Trustee Gary Rubin?
None, thank you.
Trustee Jonathan Free?
No questions.
May I have a motion to approve?
So moved. Mulvaney.
Second, Rubin.
Have a roll call, please.
Trustee Hallwax. Trustee Listener. Trustee Miller. Mulvaney.
Yes.
Trustee Rubin.
Yes.
Trustee Bree.
Yes.
Alrighty, that brings us to our regular business, which is a presentation and discussion of the 2020 summer events, is our first thing that's up on that. And I would request Management Analyst Jordan Lister to present on the staff's recommendation regarding what we should do with respect to 2020 summer events that are coming.
All right, thank you very much, President Levin and trustees. This is Management Analyst, Deputy Village Clerk Jordan Luster. So in response to the rapidly changing COVID-19 environment, village employees have been continually evaluating and implementing measures as needed to both protect and uphold the safety and well-being of Glencoe residents and employees during this challenging time. Following Governor Pritzker's March 9th State of Emergency declaration related to COVID-19 pandemic, Governor Pritzker's subsequent executive orders enacting and extending the Illinois stay-at-home order through at least May 30th, as well as following the guidance from medical and healthcare professionals, village staff has evaluated the health and safety implications of hosting some of our most treasured summer events here in the Glencoe community as originally planned. As discussed during the April 16th Village Board meeting, the village, in partnership with the Glencoe Historical Society, has already made the difficult decision to cancel the village's annual in-person Memorial Day ceremony, which, as you may recall, is held in person at Veterans Memorial Park. Staff is working with the Historical Society to provide information to the community as we have it, and as the event is further planned, and we intend to share that with the community as soon as possible so we can commemorate the lives of those who have lost when fighting for our country. Looking forward to our more summer events, Village and Glencoe Park District staff have been in continued communications regarding our 2020 summer events, particularly for those in which the village has shared planning responsibilities. In addition, staff has also reviewed our other events for which we either sponsor or permit. When we're looking through these types of events, we've considered a lot of different factors, such as the difficulties in determining how to effectively manage small, medium, and large crowds while enacting proper social distancing policies, general site logistics, the implications of placing our residents, community members, volunteers, and village staff in possibly dangerous or unsafe conditions when managing those crowds, and just the difficulties in securing vendors who are wanting to come to possibly large events. So with all of those considerations having been said, staff has developed a set of recommendations for trustees your consideration and discussion this evening. Our agenda packet details all of them, but in particular, I would like to focus on this evening, Glencoe's 4th of July festivities, Glencoe Festival of Art, and just a couple chamber events as well. So to begin with our 4th of July festivities, our 4th of July celebration is a day-long multifaceted event with many exciting activities for residents of all ages. They typically start around 8 a.m. and then continue into the evening with our fireworks celebration. Includes our Rotary Fun Run, youth games at Kalk Park, our 4th of July parade, and our party in the park. As you all were a part of last year's 2019 enhanced celebration in honor of the village's 150th anniversary, had an expanded parade, an expanded party in the park, and it drew a significantly larger number of attendees than in years prior. Under normal circumstances, it was anticipated that many of these special editions would be carried forward into 2020. In light of those additions and considering the event celebrations, staff considered what safe modifications may be feasible. However, in partnership with Glencoe Park District staff and the Park District's Board of Commissioners, which met last evening, the village is currently recommending at this time that we cancel all Glencoe 4th of July events on Saturday, July 4th. Out of abundance of caution to protect the health and safety of Glencoe residents, our staff, and our volunteers. As I mentioned, the Park District Board met last night and is in agreement that that would be the most wise and prudent decision at this time. Already the villages of Northbrook, Lake Bluff, Wilmette, and Lincolnshire, as well as the city of Highland Park, have canceled their 4th of July celebrations. I will note that the village of Northbrook has postponed their 4th of July fireworks to Labor Day. As we are reaching out to our partner municipalities, such as the villages of Northfield and Winnetka, staff, we do anticipate that we'll be hearing word from additional communities regarding modifications and/or cancellations of their respective 4th of July festivities soon. So the 4th of July is the first event we'd like to discuss this evening and seek your input. The second is the Glencoe Festival of Art. Trustees, as you may recall, the Glencoe Festival of Art is put on by Andrew Productions. For this year, the Festival of Art was originally scheduled for the weekend of July 25th and 26th. We've been in communication with Andrew Productions about the possibility of rescheduling to a date later in the fall, October 17th and October 18th. Andrew Productions has indicated that they're willing to work with the village to incorporate many of the social distancing recommendations that are out there and reevaluate the festival layout as a whole. Some of these options may include increasing the distance between the booths and incorporating one-way traffic, having hand sanitizer at the booths, and other similar event modifications. So at this time, we do recommend moving the Festival of Art from its original date, the end of July, to October 17th and 18th. So that is the second event we would like to have your input in this evening. And then last but not least, the Glencoe Chamber of Commerce does hold several important events that the village permits, the first of which is the Glencoe French Market. I will say, not related to COVID-19, the Chamber of Commerce informed the village that they were unable to secure their market manager for the 2020 season. So for matters unrelated to COVID-19, the Chamber will not be hosting the French Market this year. We are eager to hear what possibilities may come forth for 2021, but it will not be taking place this year. And then last but not least, the Glencoe Chamber's Sidewalk sale, which is held at the end of June, or is scheduled to be held at the end of June. a month. We're going to be in contact with chamber representatives about that. So at this time, we welcome the board's feedback and input on these summer events. And if you have any questions, I welcome them.
All right, Trustee Hallwax, do you have any questions or thoughts?
I have one question. Do we know of any villages that are actually going to hold any sort of 4th of July celebrations at all?
Not in our immediate area.
I could confirm that, Trustee Hallwax.
What we're hearing, this is Manager Corrali. What we're hearing is that everyone is working their way through the decision-making process, but it's very likely that many, if not all, will be canceled for this 4th.
And President Levin, if I can just add, we've invited Manager Corrali to a call that our firm is sponsoring on Monday morning to talk about this very issue with 50 of our neighboring communities and go over what events have been canceled, what have not, and also re-entry.
I would mention that what I've been hearing, if you're between here and Barrington and all of that, most of us in the discussions we've been having felt that we were not going to be in a position to do the things needed for the 4th of July. And all of us were concerned if any one of us held it, everybody else's residents would come as well, and it would get out of control.
Yeah, I agree. If that was why I asked, if we did anything and we're the only people doing any kind of event, then we would, our residents wouldn't necessarily be the ones benefiting, and we would have to deal with the problem.
Gail, any thoughts?
Well, I definitely agree that it is almost upon us and too soon for any of these public events. What I was wondering, with the rescheduling of the AMDR production festival in October, is there any financial obligation at all on the part of the village if for whatever we decide that in October we still are not ready? So I was just wondering if you give us flexibility with this reschedule.
There is no financial responsibility between AMDR and the village. This is a special event permit process. What we have discussed with them has been if public safety concerns, public health and well-being concerns continue into the fall, they are willing to cancel, even if we've rescheduled to October. They are looking at and working toward even virtual art festival events that could take the place of a physical event if it's just determined that there's no good way to do it. So there's no financial risk on our side, but certainly their primary concern is that people are safe.
Okay, thank you very much.
Barbara?
Well, I think that these cancellations and postponements are absolutely necessary. Full stop. It's also profoundly disappointing that we have to do this. I mean, it just, looking at this list, I just want to cry. And so I do want to encourage our creative staffs of the village, Park District, et cetera, to, if you can come up with ways of doing. I don't know what a virtual event encompasses entirely. I don't know what the limits of that word are, but virtual events that somehow would also allow people to see each other, whether it's, everybody's stepping out on their doorstep to see something at the same time, things like that, to turn our minds to those kinds of things. I think it would help. It's it's a very different kind of a summer, and if there are any things that we could do, and I wish I could come up with something, I haven't, but there are, smarter, more creative minds than mine perhaps could. So that's That is my comment.
Thank you, Barbara. Peter?
Yeah, regarding July 4th, I think that we could come up with something. And I think it's important that we have some form of celebration. I don't know if it needs to be a virtual one. I think, at least personally, I'm getting pretty burned out on trying to be a movie star all the time. I think ideas like stepping outside at 4 o'clock on July 4th and staying on your property. I think if we enable more flag waves, have some kind of goal to get a certain number of flags posted. If we maybe tie it to the Declaration of Independence, maybe there's a posting of the Declaration of Independence downtown, and people can at least visit and get in touch with a little bit of that history. I'd be really disappointed if we don't have some form of celebration. I don't think it needs to be the traditional things that we've been doing, but it's something to get people to feel happy about. And so I want to push very hard that our staff not think about July 4th as canceled and we're done, but rather double down and come up with something creative quickly that will galvanize the community and give them a chance to celebrate. I don't think just canceling is a good answer. I think we can do better than that. With respect to the art program, I think I heard you say that can be postponed to a later date, and I think that's great. I think that's an important program to try and support and let them know that we would have their back if they were to come back around later in the year if the conditions are right. We should let them know that we would love to see them at another time. All right, primary thoughts.
Gary Rubin?
I very much appreciate the creative ideas, especially with regard to doing something on the 4th, perhaps on our own properties. I'm a little concerned about having any central focus or, within the village that people would go to. But things that we can otherwise do perhaps all at the same time or encouraged to do at the same time to have a shared experience, I think is an excellent creative idea from my co-trustees. And I would second that. The regular festivities, unfortunately, as painful as it is and as wonderful as last year's were, especially painful, we need to cancel out of safety concerns. I don't think there's any issue whatsoever. So I'm in agreement with the suggestions by staff. And I would love to see the art folks come back if we can do it safely when they can come back later in the year. That too would be wonderful.
Jonathan Vreed.
I certainly agree with everything about July 4th that's been said as far as trying to do something separately that celebrates it together. I guess on the postponement, I'd love to see it postponed, but we talk about when a second wave hits and it's going to be hitting right in October. I just don't know that we ought to plan much for having something in the fall. Well, if there's postponing is a good idea if we can just put it out, but there's no effort put into it. But I certainly doubt something's happening in the fall. Now, that's me. Maybe I'm more negative than everybody else, but that's how I'm feeling about it.
Okay, if I could summarize a little, what I'm hearing is that we all agree with what staff has presented. We lament that we're not able to do these things. It's very sad. And what we'd like to see, if possible, is if there's some way to build upon whatever occurs on Memorial Day, to see how that is received from the Historic Society. And is there a way to put something on so it's virtual and people tune into it for the 4th of July that might at least show them some fireworks and might talk about the relationship of the 4th of July and how Glencoe celebrated it in the past or whatever, to see if there's something we could put together to at least bring everybody together for a focal point of some sort without physically having us out and together. Because We would worry a great deal if this is still going on, if we had physical things downtown or otherwise. So with the caveat that if things are better and we could do that, we can always come back and revisit this. I would think, unless someone on the board has another view, that we would say, please take all of these thoughts into account and see what comes. Does that make sense?
President Levin, this is Trustee Miller. My comment was not intended to be limited just to the 4th of July or really even necessarily pegged to any one or more of these events, but rather whatever staff can come up with to have virtual events. 4th of July, I agree, is really important, but I think virtual events that help the village, not have to entirely be their own camp counselors, et cetera, would be really helpful. That may or may not track with these particular events.
And if things change, we certainly want the staff to come back to us and see if there are other things we can do. I have to say that after listening to the last week's worth of discussions amid everybody from the governor on down, I have no idea whether they're thinking that in Illinois we're going to be open before the fall. I'm hoping that at the end of this month we're open, but I wouldn't be surprised if it goes to fall. Any other thoughts? Okay, let me just go quickly down and make sure that if there aren't any other thoughts, we can just say so and then we'll move on. Joe, anything further?
No further thoughts.
Gail?
No.
Barbara?
No.
Peter?
Sing along and work. No other thoughts. Thank you.
Gary?
None. Thank you.
Jonathan?
No.
Okay. I think that really sort of sums up where we are on that. Does the staff have any questions of us on what we've talked about?
I think we've got direction, and I'll just point out for the benefit of the board and your comments, these are things that we have been also dialoguing with our colleagues at the Park District in particular about in terms of ways to create experiences this summer and into the fall for the community. So we will carry forward your message into those conversations. And I have no doubt that there will be some way for us as a community to celebrate 4th of July and other events through the summer.
Okay, unfortunately, we're not having a lot of celebrations, and our next topic is presentation and discussion of proposed changes to the Village of Glencoe Stubbier 2020 budget to mitigate the financial impact of the COVID-19 pandemic. And I'm not sure that what Nikki's going to tell us is going to cause a lot of celebration either. So Nikki, you want to give us a little discussion on that?
Thank you.
Actually, I'm going to get started and then hand it off to Nikki. Again, for the benefit of those who are listening in, this is Phil Corrali, the village manager. This is a brief introduction to tonight's conversation. Last month, staff presented for village board consideration a tiered financial response model that outlined how the village could monitor revenues and expenditures for the current fiscal year. The discussion last month focused much more on the village's revenues and what early expectations for the impacts to those revenues might be. Tonight, really as a follow-up to that April discussion, the finance director has provided a report to the village board in your packets regarding some initial reductions in spending for the current stub year 2020 budget. Last month, we discussed staff was reviewing ways to reduce expenses in a considered and deliberate way as we navigate these uncertain times. Along those lines, we have identified approximately $1.75 million in possible capital deferrals and operational reductions in the general fund, as well as savings in both the water and motor fuel tax funds as well. One thing I want to make mention of and underscore is that these are initial recommendations based upon early indications of revenue shortfalls. It's important to note these are not the only options that are available to the village. However, at the staff level, we believe that given what we know now and the expected impacts to our revenues at this time, that these reductions are prudent first steps that do not sacrifice the village's ability to provide services to our community, nor do they limit future actions should they become necessary. Should additional financial impacts be realized, staff is already evaluating additional steps that may be necessary, and we would intend to bring those to the board as a next step. So Finance Director Larson is going to walk you through what those recommendations are this evening, and then we'll be happy to answer questions that the board may have. All of the department heads are with us at the meeting this evening, and they'll be prepared to answer questions as well. So I'll hand the baton off to Nikki with that.
Okay. Thank you. All right. Okay, so you may recognize, this is Finance Director Larson speaking. You may recognize this image from last month as we went through the tiered financial response model. And as the village manager just indicated, what we have identified for this evening is really that immediate response, which is that top level of the image. Primarily, our first step was to seek financial assistance, understanding that we are not aware yet what that might mean for us, and also reducing the operating expenses and deferring capital projects for those revenue shortfalls that we may be aware of today. As we discussed earlier tonight, our projections last month were actually worse for the current month than what they turned out to be. We were pleasantly surprised to receive additional revenue that we were not expecting. So that's why it is so important for us to stay on top of this month by month, because it is changing very rapidly. The second tier in this image indicates what we would need to do above and beyond if things did worsen. Really those steps that we would need to take if it was necessary once we see certain indicators of financial health declining. And obviously that would be something that we would come back to the board and have a thorough discussion about before making any changes. Going into specifically what we have identified in our first round of review. The department heads and the staff has spent quite a bit of time kind of combing through the budget, trying to identify those items that could be delayed or deferred with a minimal impact on our services and on our residents. Go through these individually. I am getting, oh shoot.
Minor technical difficulties. We'll be back with you shortly.
Is it just me?
Yeah, I think she may unplug her computer.
Having trouble with the slides. I would mention on the slides, one of the things where we were talking about potential costs and savings included light the lights, and my hope is that this will all be past us and we'll be having a big village celebration come light the lights. I just add that in from our last discussion.
It looked like
Great New Year.
was the biggest.
Yes, if we could bring that back. Nikki's computer just shut down. I just got a text message from her. And a little bit of feedback. Microphones, that would be great. So, Nikki, are you with us still, or have you fallen off? So we'll continue while Nikki reconnects. Okay, yeah, we could stay on this slide. Thank you, whoever is playing with that. So as Nikki pointed out, these reductions and changes are initial estimates on certain of these function areas within the operating budget, and certainly we can elaborate further if there are questions that individual trustees have regarding any of this and what some of this may mean. And again, answer those questions that you may have. We can do that as we go, or certainly we can do it at the end. We'll follow your lead as to however you'd like to do that. So, President Levin, I'm not sure how you would rather approach that.
I think I would like to approach it by just sort of going through and doing a quick discussion of what this represents, and then hearing if there are questions from the trustees that we can answer.
Okay. So should we then continue through with capital?
Yes.
Okay. If we can advance the slide, please. Are we able to advance the slide? There we go. Okay. Slide 20. So I'll take a lead on this. What you see there under the column of approved Stubbier 2020 budget, these are all of the items. I shouldn't say they are all of the items within. I should say, excuse me. They are all of the items within the general fund and the CIP, the Community Investment Program, for the current Stubbier 2020 budget. We've provided some guidance about certain projects that are currently underway, and our recommendations in the notes relative to deferral of some of these projects into a future fiscal year. That may mean we also take a different look at these projects depending upon what the financial impact may be as we proceed through the fiscal year. That also leaves open the opportunity that if the fiscal year situation improves and resources become available during the course of the fiscal year, we may be able to initiate some of these projects. Just to point out a couple that are currently underway that have been kind of long-term projects that we've been working toward and why they remain underway, one of which is the Enterprise Resource Planning Program. This is our second year of implementation. As the board will recall, this was about an 18-month planned process to completely change over our financial systems and all of our central computing systems to interconnect together. We are still working through implementation this year, and so we anticipate continuing along. There are operational efficiencies that we anticipate coming from that, and that's why we want to see that project through. There is another year after this where we will be continuing to implement. Another program that is important from an operational standpoint is our parking system program improvements. This relates to both our commuter parking lots as well as parking enforcement in our downtown and elsewhere in the village. And that process is working its way through this, I should say implementation of that is working its way through this year with an anticipated kickoff of the new system on January 1 of 2021. There are a few, and we do have Public Works Director Dave Mao who can answer some questions about these. A few items where we are suggesting some reductions during the course of the year with the ability again to ramp up if necessary. And those are both in our residential sidewalk program and the stormwater drainage improvement program. This is a small year for stormwater improvements. We do not, this $150,000 that's budgeted is intended to pay for certain stormwater tolls, minor Oh, I think Nikki might be back. Nikki, are you back?
I am trying. I don't know if you can hear. Can you hear me?
We can hear you.
All right. Thank you.
We can hear you.
All right. My apologies.
No, technical difficulties are the most fun kind. And so again, there are certainly questions that Director Mao can answer. Our intent in looking at these was from the beginning, what were we able to delay or defer without negatively impacting our operations? It's not to say that you can perpetually delay these. We do realize that that is a short-term solution, not a long-term one, but one that is necessary, I think, as we work our way through understanding the impacts to our overall revenue picture in the current fiscal year. These will certainly impact our overall CIP if they're delayed and deferred, as we have to take a fresh look at that with every fiscal year and every budget planning process. We would anticipate that being part of our discussions as we ramp up into our next fiscal year, which begins January 1st. We can advance the slide.
Okay.
There we go. Nikki, you want to take it over?
Sure. Thank you.
Okay.
My apologies. Okay. So this is Finance Director Larson again. Moving on to the water fund and the other projects that we've identified outside of the general fund. Once again, just to reiterate, these items that were identified as part of our community investment program are still a priority for us. And it does not mean that we don't need to go forward with these projects. It does mean that we can push them slightly with minimal impact on our services. So outside of the general fund, those items that we have identified that can be slightly pushed were the replacements of pumps and motors at our water treatment plant. Again, these are approaching the end of their life, but they can survive a little bit longer for us. We were also fortunate in that our water residential meter replacement program was estimated to come in at approximately $2.5 million. And the contract came in much less than anticipated. So we do have significant savings in the water fund that also allowed us to downscale the bond issue that would fund this project as well. So there is some significant savings there as well. Moving down to the other funds in terms of capital project funds, motor fuel tax, and golf projects. I do have to correct the continuous golf cart path. That has been reduced slightly, downsized. I don't have that number handy. I apologize, but we will get that to you. And obviously the Tudor Court streetscape improvements are currently underway. So that project will move forward, and that was funded, as the board will recall, with limited tax obligation bonds that were issued last fall. So we do have those bond proceeds ready and available, and they are required to be spent within 3 years of issue. So that is a large determining factor as to why that project is moving forward. Okay. And at this point, I'm happy to answer any questions or go back to any of the detailed projects if there are any comments or suggestions.
Joe Hallwax, do you have any questions or comments?
No questions, comments.
Gail, do you have questions or comments?
I guess my only question or comment relates to the residential water meter replacement, which I know will be financed with bond proceeds. But I am just concerned about the timing of this project and the fact that not only do we need to spend money, that's one thing, but that we need the residents to really support this project, because they are going to need to allow workmen into their home. And I know that this is planned fall. So I'm concerned that this may not be the right time to be moving forward with this program at the present time. If anyone else has similar concerns with that.
Trustee listener, it might be helpful. We had a meeting yesterday with the contractor for this project to talk just about what your concern was. And Dave Mao, are you able to provide a brief overview of that discussion?
Public Works Director Dave Mao. As the manager indicated, we did have a long conversation with Cora and Maine, our contractor, yesterday about moving forward both the front end work and then the village-wide meeting. They've got a considerable amount of work to do at the front end that doesn't involve any public contact, and so they're gonna be proceeding with that a month ahead. They've got transmitters to install in town, and then the front end, the financial, the water billing component is work they can get started on. We did talk at length about the meter replacement process. The subcontractor that does that work, they are also working in other Chicago area communities and have obviously stopped that work, and so we agreed. We're working together with them on messaging on how to get that information out early on what that'll look like. We did agree that there's an unknown here today in May on what the order is going to look like by August, and they're understanding that we may an August 1 start date may be September or October, and that's okay. We're also working through a protocol on what that installation process is and what it isn't. It's a relatively short-term entry into the home. It's very targeted location in the home, and so we're working through that, recognizing that is a very real aspect of that the community is going to have a comfort level with, and so we're not we're looking at it. We're talking about options both from a safety and a PPE standpoint, as well as messaging to the community. So I think it's a valid concern, but it's one I think we're beginning to work on and talk about, and if and the delay pushing this out is entirely possible, but we still feel that there's enough criticalness. We've got meters that are continuing to fail that we need this program to continue to move forward. If we need to take different looks at timing on it, that may be an element of it.
I mean, my only comment is we should not underestimate kind of the reaction that we may get from the community. I think this is very different than any other kind of community investment program that we do, because it does involve going into people's homes at a time when we won't have a vaccine. And, as we've already said today, the projections for the fall aren't necessarily good. So I'm just concerned with, we'll start the project, and when the community starts really thinking about it and, having to let the workmen into their house, that we do have a plan that has really been vetted with infectious disease specialists, so that we know that the protocol that we will be following will be reasonable, and that this is a prudent time to be doing the project. I can certainly understand why we're saving money on the contract, because I think everybody is bidding projects a little bit tighter because of the economic environment we're in right now. So sometimes it's good to move forward with things, but I think we really have to think about our residents as we ponder this project.
I think that's why there are so many opportunities to address that. The things that are actually moving forward at this point will save a lot of money on and get in place. And I think that we just have to be very careful and understand that when we actually go into people's homes may end up getting delayed.
if I could add, again, this is Village Manager Corrali. There's no doubt the concern that that you're expressing, trustee listener, and that we anticipate others will express as well. What we are going to begin the process of doing, as Public Works Director Mao mentioned, is developing those protocols and understanding what those protocols are. This type of action would fall within an essential service. It's very similar to a repair person coming in to fix a heating system or an appliance in an individual's home. And I do understand the distinction there is that somebody is asking for that versus somebody being told to do that. And so we do want to be very, very sensitive to that. Our understanding is that the impact is minimal. It would be a single individual for about a 15 to 20 minute window where they would be within the house, wearing personal protective equipment, masks, gloves, booties, things of that nature. So we will continue as we work through this to solidify all those plans and provide that information to the board and begin to provide that information to the community too, so that we can get feedback and concern.
And we do have to remember that approximately 90% of our community is right now at this moment in the process of having people come into their homes and turn on their sprinkler systems and do work that is more extensive and more contact than this would be. So it isn't as if that isn't going on an ongoing basis. But I think we have to be very sensitive to it, and I think the staff is being sensitive to it.
I think as you already had mentioned, the difference is the people who are letting the sprinkler people into their homes are choosing to do that. Whereas this is a project where we are telling our residents that this is something that we really need to facilitate the completion of the project.
Correct. And that's why it's got to be handled very carefully. And we'll see where all this is by the time that we get to it.
No further comments.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I may have missed it. I have no comments or questions.
Peter?
Yes.
I'm not hearing you. You seem to be silent.
I agree with trustee listener, and simply put, this project won't be successful without full public support. So any and all efforts to pre-educate and inform residents, I think, will be important, not only in the plan to react, but to prevent any adverse reactions in the first place and get people really well informed and get a pulse of whether or not this is a good idea at that time. Really important. I think the other comments I have are associated with, in terms of proposed budget changes. I do think, and Phil, I know you alluded to this in your opening remarks, that there are additional levers that can be used. And I think you're alluding to the potential of staff reductions. I think there are ways that we can provide opportunities for staff to change their work style and potentially save some funds. I think that we ought to be thinking about what a modified full-time or part-time worker will do, and whether or not our employees would actually welcome some flexibility in their work schedule, and at the same time potentially save some budget on our end, while providing the employees some perhaps very necessary and needed flexibility as they deal with an extended childcare, with the schools being closed and summer camps being closed, etc. So I think we can be a little bit more creative, is what I'm saying, in the operational side. And we also need to not just be silent that that's a possibility of going even steeper than that. we ought to just be open, I think, about the potential for either headcount reductions. I know we're not there now, but it ought to be something that we ought to be open about, that those things are possible, if not a headcount, reductions in hours could be an option. Anyways, I just want to make sure that we are not avoiding those discussions. Those are my comments. Thanks.
Actually, Peter, I think I would say it's just the opposite. Looking at what we might do if we had the need to do it, I think is an ongoing and very deep discussion going on within the village staff. What we have here is the various changes designed to buy the time to let us find out what are the needs for those kinds of changes. Because for the next few months, we're not going to know what our cash flow really is or where we're going to go. But that doesn't mean that the planning, in case one has to implement more changes, isn't full and ongoing. This is all being put before you to show a design that lets us have the benefit of worrying about the things you're talking about when we're actually examining next year's budget. And once we get a much better feel for what the change will be in our cash flows, the planning for what to talk to us about, if that becomes necessary, is ongoing right now. And it'd be, I wouldn't want anybody to think that it isn't.
Thank you for articulating that, Larry. Thank you for articulating that.
Gary, any comments?
First, I have to thank our village manager for spending so much time with me in advance of this meeting, going through many of the items on these pages, providing additional detail to me in advance of the meeting. So really most of my questions, in fact, all my questions were answered in advance of the meeting. I do think it's important to commend the approach. I think it's the right one, that where we're starting is the right place to start, especially while we do not have a real handle on what our finances are going to look like yet, and the impact of this upon us, while there's so many different pieces in flux, everything from timing of events that we have no control over to other things we have no control over, like whether or not the federal government provides us any help at all, as is currently being discussed. So there's an awful lot of unknowns, and I think we're taking the right steps here. And I think it's in the right order. I think the last thing, I applaud Peter's thought that especially when people have issues with schooling at home and childcare and other sorts of stuff going on, and their other spouses are, their spouses are working as well, and there's all kinds of constraints on them, that some might welcome different hours of operation with the village, if that can be accommodated to sort of help us and help them. That's a benefit. That's a win-win. But in general, I don't think we have a lot of extra people. I don't think we have extra people working for us. I think we're staffed pretty efficiently. And personally, the last thing I want to see touched are the people that are doing such a magnificent job for us at every level, whether it's our first responders, the people that are keeping the water pipes, fixed, people that are running the water plants, everybody that's keeping the village running, making sure we get bills out, bills paid, everybody, and certainly leadership. So I think that's the last place we look to cut at all, if we have to. And I think we're a long way. Fortunately, all of my predecessors, because I'm still the new kid on the block, have done a great job of putting us in a position where we're in a good place to start financially. Delay those times as we possibly can. Those are just my thoughts.
Jonathan?
So I think this is all helpful. Some of the things that I'd want to think about. So we do the 10-year plan. So putting what we're delaying or deferring into some context, because we're already in a light capital expense year, or capital expenditure. But so we need to think about what we're delaying into next year, because some of these revenues, I mean, we get sales tax from restaurants and things. Those aren't gonna, that doesn't get made up. Well, even if they go back to normal, we've lost the time where we can get some of the sales tax from that activity. We also have to assume that the state of Illinois is going to be in have financial difficulties over the next few years as well, because of the spending that's been going on at the state level, and then even at the federal level. I mean, there is a lot of money getting thrown at the problem right now without a discussion or description of how we're going to pay for it. So I think we need to think about not only what we're delaying, but how it fits in with next year and the years after, because things may be totally different as far as our financial situation. So delaying, I know, and I'm sure you guys are thinking about this. I'm not meaning you're not. But I very much think when we talk about this, we should look at more than just this year and what delaying something from this year into next year might mean. And then also our debt schedule. So when we had plans for raising our next tranches of debt, we need to think about all those things. We certainly don't want to start using debt for operational expenses. And the pieces of that, the estimates that we saw that are more up to date have dropped significantly. All the surprises to the upside were the ones that looked 3 months ago. And economy was in pretty good shape in January and February, and it totally fell off. So I just worry that just delaying without recognizing, and again, I'm not saying you guys haven't done all this, but just we need to recognize the context of this year versus the entirely different financial situation we'll be in next year. And it may not be positive even if the economy is coming back.
Trustee Bree, if I can address that, this is Finance Director Larson. Before I went off the technological cliff, I was remiss to mention this financial monitoring is going to become even more important as we start to plan for our first calendar year. And I hate to say this, but we are already starting to resurrect our budget calendar and plan for that, especially because of the situation that we are in today, which makes this even more important. And you make an excellent point. Where we would start with this process would be to look at how these revenues are impacting us, what we're projecting going forward, as much as we can with the information that we have today, but also what that looks like pushing all of that down the road. So we are going to have to take a look at this holistically. Part of our budget process every year is to reevaluate that CIP and determine if these items are still of priority or if they need to be shifted. So there is typically that process that happens as we lay out that 10-year period. And that financial bond issue plan that goes along with that is part of it as well. And I imagine that we are going to have to overhaul that quite a bit, given the current circumstance.
Okay, sounds good. Thanks.
Any other questions? Okay, to summarize a little bit, the way that I think what we're saying to the staff is that we want to make sure that they're very focused on adjusting to what's coming down the road and to planning so that when we see what's happening, especially in terms of the fact that we expect shortly to be going into the budgeting process for next year, and that there needs to really be a reassessment of how our entire capital program lays out in view of this, and what we anticipate as we get more information next year is really going to look like, and that we have to be open to taking a look at everything so that we look at the total staffing, the total approach to delivering services, and the total capital budget when we go into next year, and that this is designed to give us a methodology that will buy time while giving us maximum flexibility to react to whatever really happens down the road. But we want you to keep doing this on a regular basis and with careful eyes, which is what you have been doing. Does that seem to summarize what we're trying to convey? Any thoughts? If not, then because we're already at 7 o'clock. The question is, does anybody have anything else they want to bring before the board? Not hearing anybody say that they do. Let me ask if there's been any comments from the public that have been received during the meeting that should be read into the record.
President Levin, this is Management Analyst, Deputy Village Clerk Jordan Lester. We have not received any additional public comment during the course of the meeting.
Thank you. Given that, and not having heard anything else that we need to take up, may I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved. Mulvaney.
Second, Hellwax.
Have a roll call, please.
Trustee Hallwax. Trustee Listener.
Yes.
Trustee Miller.
Yes.
Trustee Mulvaney.
Yes.
Trustee Rubin.
Yes.
Trustee Reed.
Yes.
I want to thank everybody for their participation tonight. And I know we had a few technical glitches and difficulties, but I think you've done a great job of giving needed input to the staff so that they can keep going forward doing the things we want them to be focused on and doing. And I want to express my appreciation to everybody for having gone through everything to get ready for and for being a participant in tonight's meeting. Thank you all. Good night. Stay well.
Thank you.
Good night.
Bye.